Good morning. Today we begin the book of Leviticus. Leviticus is the book that deals with priesthood. The descendants of Levi were to be the priests, and so Moses and Aaron were descendants of Levi. And so in Exodus we read about how Aaron and his sons were going to be set apart, and they would have all the priestly robes on. So Leviticus is, in an awful lot of ways, a book of worship. Leviticus for me has been a book that I get bogged down in so often with trying to make sense of all of the different sacrifices and everything that goes on. But this book, I'm going to try to read it differently this year. I mean, when I read it, I'm going to try to keep this open-minded idea of it being a book of worship, a book of showing how God desires to have this right relationship with God's people, of God coming and giving the Israelites instructions as to how to do the sacrifices, how to live, how to get along with each other, and when there are sins done, how to correct them, how to make how to live in ritual and moral purity, not only with God, but with each other. Remember, as we ended reading Exodus yesterday, that God was in the Ark of the Covenant, where he was in the tabernacle, with the people. And the book of Leviticus is a way, shows us the way, shows the Israelites the way to remain in this right relationship with God. These rituals of sacrifice, rituals of worship, were given to a people who had been redeemed. God had brought them out of captivity in Egypt. He had again claimed them to be his own. He had been ready to abandon them, just to destroy them a couple times, but through the reminder by Moses that these are your people, God continues to lead and guide them. And when we get to Leviticus 11, and there is when God says to the people, you shall be holy, for I am holy. And that's a reminder for us too that we are holy because God is holy. I may not always feel holy. I mean, very seldom, in so many ways. But it's a reminder for us that the holiness of God supersedes everything. And, oftentimes we'll wonder, well, what does this book of Leviticus have to do with us today? And it's one of the challenges, I think, of much of the Bible is to, what does it have to do with us today? I mean, Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, his death and resurrection, I mean, we can put that into daily forgiveness and grace and the promise of our own resurrection. But, some of these old laws, of Leviticus, it's full of these laws and stuff that, we don't observe, we don't practice. There's laws of sacrifice. There's laws of the priestly ordination. There's the description of clean and unclean is, very specific things in there. We don't do the sacrifices. We don't worry about clean and unclean foods and stuff that way. And so for us, it's a reminder of God's holiness, that we are holy because of God, and that we are called to live the best life we can. And so with that lengthy introduction, maybe, as we come, it's a reminder then of God's purpose for us, and that we are to live the very best life we can, for God and for God's people, not only just for me, but to live for community. So as we begin, chapter 1 talks about the burnt offering. And this burnt offering that begins, God says to Moses, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you bring an offering to the Lord, you shall bring your offering of the livestock from the herd or the flock. And this offering is to be a male, and And it says he shall offer it of his own free will at the temple of God. So it isn't mandatory. It isn't you got to do this, but it's an offering to the Lord. And that's with our offerings that we give to the church or to charities or whatever. I mean, if a church demands that you give so much, or if they, I don't like to bash TV preachers, but they really do ask for donations, and if you feel guilted into something, that's not the way it should be. I mean, your gifts to anything should be of your own free will, and especially not to impoverish you at all. But anyway, they were to be a free will offering. And as he brought this offering, this burnt offering, it says he shall put his hand on the head of the burnt offering, so it will be accepted on his behalf to make atonement for him. And then it gives instructions as to how the priests will handle this. And then there's another offering that can be from the flocks, and it can be it says the brings it before the Lord, and the priests and Aaron's sons will sprinkle them. They'll do all of this stuff, and if the offering, some of the offerings can be male or female. In verse 14 of chapter 1, if the burnt sacrifice of his offering is of birds, so it can be pigeons or turtle doves. And so God makes it so that anybody of any financial means can make these offerings. It doesn't have to be, to think about it, to offer a bull. In today's markets, bulls and rams, they're worth a lot of money. A bull's definitely a lot more than a ram, for a sheep or a goat or those things. But it's substantial amount. And so not everybody could afford that bull or that ram, but some would be doves or pigeons or whatever. And then chapter 2 deals with grain offerings, and the grain offerings are to be of the finest ground flour. And then I always pictured a grain offering as, a bushel of wheat, or, the whole kernels. But, when you read it, it shall be of fine flour. He shall pour oil on it, put frankincense on it, and bring it to Aaron's sons. And they'll take a handful of this fine flour and oil and the frankincense, and they'll burn it. And then if some of this is brought as, it could be cooked. It could be mixed with flour, and it has to be unleavened. Any offering can't have any leaven in it, and it can't have any honey in it, these burnt offerings. So there are very specific instructions. And, some of it, if it was baked in a pan, it shall be this way, and you break it in pieces, pour oil on it, it's a grain offering. And if your offering is a grain baked in a covered pan, it shall be made with fine flour. And then when we get down into here, it's verse 9, the priest shall take from the grain offering a memorial portion, burn it on the altar. It's an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma. Verse 10, and what is left of the grain offering shall be Aaron's and his sons. So the priests weren't out with herds and flocks, and the priests didn't have that. They weren't making a living for themselves on the land or with the livestock. The priests depended upon the offerings made, and so the priests could eat some of the bread, and the priests could eat some of the meat offerings. This was a portion was for the priests that way. And, it goes on with those different grain offerings. And chapter 3 deals with peace offerings. And here again, this one can be, it says whether a male or a female shall be offered without blemish. And so the peace offering is an offering for wholeness, for completeness, for yourself and for your community and everything that way. And so these God is giving his people instructions in holy living, in how to come to God and to worship God. And we're not into the worshiping God so far yet, but the offerings, the burnt offerings, the sacrifices. And so rather than try to get bogged down in all of the gruesome details of some of this, I'm going to try to keep an open mind and look at this book as a way of showing me better how to worship God and to follow God's laws. Have a great day.